Right, let's get to it then, and let's start with Saturday's FA Cup final. Manchester City beating Chelsea by 1-0 at Wembley. But the big news after the final is the imminent arrival of Xabi Alonso. The Sunday Times has gone with that on their front page. Alonso set for 4-year contract to take charge at Chelsea, and the Sunday Telegraph's Matt Law says Chelsea players have been informed that Alonso will be their new head coach and are said to be excited by his appointment. While Chelsea have not promised Alonso full control, he'll be given a more meaningful role in the club's decision-making than some of his predecessors. Jackie, let me start with you. Are you surprised that Chelsea have got him, and are you surprised he's taken it?
No, not really. I think the surprise really is maybe that if he was going to come to the Premier League, the theory was to Liverpool, but I'm sure we'll be talking about Liverpool in due course. I quite like Rory Smith's take on it in The Observer today, where he described the appointment as surprisingly sensible for Chelsea, bearing in mind the last few appointments haven't necessarily been the case. It smacks of the Chelsea hierarchy realising where they've been going wrong. I think a lot of us wanted it to work for Liam Rosenior for a multitude of reasons. It just didn't, and the players themselves took matters into their own hands in terms of seeming to show up when they felt like it and turning it on when they felt like it, and you simply can't have that. So they need this new era of authority, and he will, by all accounts, be named as a manager rather than a head coach for the first time since Jose Mourinho. And it just really feels like at Chelsea they need the manager to be the one calling the shots. They have so much going on above with the 5 different sporting directors, which in itself is pretty extraordinary, but they need the manager, somebody who will command the respect of the dressing room, having won everything himself as a player and having already proved himself as a manager. Real Madrid, OK, we can kind of take that out and put it down to experience. There are reasons why it didn't go right there. But I think this is a really, really good appointment.
Jason, the headline in The Sun on Sunday is Blues and Twos, incoming boss Alonso's huge fix to fix emergency situation. Dan King's piece starts, there is no trophy to paper over the cracks of Chelsea's disastrous season, and the imminent appointment of Xabi Alonso will only be a sticking plaster unless the Blues owners are serious about a change of direction. This structure, this infamous structure, if you like, has not worked out well for his predecessors, and there have been many of them, let's be honest. Yeah. Why will this be different?
Because I think, as Jackie says, I mean, they've obviously shifted a little bit in terms of the way they're going to organise themselves. They've got a manager who's coming in as a manager. OK, what's interesting is Chelsea are briefing that they have decided to call him manager, that he's not asked to be manager. He was happy to be a head coach. Obviously, he's been a head coach at Real Madrid, head coach at Bayer Leverkusen. I think this is a different dimension in terms of the stature of the person who's coming into the club. I think there's an awful thing about Chelsea's structure is obviously it's not been working. I think they're not stupid people, though. You know, they will learn. And I think, obviously, we've talked about this before in the past, a lot of people come into football, going to reinvent the wheel, going to change things. And obviously, it needs to evolve. But there are certain things that obviously haven't worked at Chelsea that they need to remedy. Bringing somebody like Xabi Alonso in, I think they've really lucked out with him. I think he's a manager who can give them the kind of organisation, the kind of leadership that they've lacked in the past. They've got the balance all wrong in the past, and they seem to be readdressing that a little bit. I think Dan's take is a little bit over the top. I don't think it's a complete disaster at Chelsea. I think they have done some quite good stuff as well there. But I think somebody like Xabi Alonso coming in, it's definitely an appointment that they couldn't have done better, in my opinion. They absolutely could not have done better. And it's obviously partly circumstance, a little bit of luck and a little bit of timing. And I think they've done well to get him.
Mark, look, how this season has gone, I mean, it's fallen way below expectations. They could be in a position where they don't even get European football for next season, having been the much vaunted world champions, if you like, last summer. Will this have told the owners this season in particular, like, there's the line in the sand, we need to change the way we do things, especially with how we recruit players?
Yeah, like Jason said, it's been a learning process, and credit to the owners. They've taken the lessons from this season and implemented the lessons. What I'm saying is that Xabi Alonso is a big manager, and they've moved away from their kind of previous route of hiring inexperienced coaches. Now, we all know that Rosenior was very inexperienced. Even Maresca held one full season as a manager when he was at Leicester. You know, Pochettino was the kind of in-between model, but he left after a year because he couldn't he couldn't accept the recruitment policy. And prior to him, it was Graham Potter. So I think they've realised that if you want success, and success for Chelsea is being in the Champions League and winning trophies. So being out of Europe completely not only hits their prestige, it hits their bottom line as well. And these people are successful businessmen. They'll realise that to be successful, you have to get the right things done. They've made mistakes, they've corrected those mistakes. And Xabi Alonso, for me, is, a year ago, he was the hottest property in coaching, wasn't it? And Real Madrid had kind of held off Liverpool a year before to get Xabi Alonso. They realised that this was the guy. He basically stopped Bayern Munich winning endless Bundesliga titles. So, top manager, top coach. What happened at Real was, how do you explain it? He just went into a dressing room which has been uncontrollable for quite a long time. So, Chelsea getting one of the rising coaches in Europe is a player with great credentials as a player, rising star as a coach, and the players in that dressing room who basically brought down Liam Rosenior, the results brought him down, but they were part of those results, don't respect Xabi Alonso from day one. So Chelsea basically said to these players, right, you've got no excuses now. Your excuse last time was the manager wasn't up to your standards, and he wasn't. Liam Rosenior wasn't a Chelsea manager, but this guy is. So the players got no excuses, and Chelsea have basically said, right, you perform now because you've got a coach that you can't complain about.
Jason, you mentioned it before. How important is that line between head coach and manager, particularly at Chelsea?
Yeah, you want to make sure it's not just lip service being paid by giving them the title, but I think actually there's a recognition that the manager needs to have more input, especially in the recruitment side of things. That's where they've got it wrong. And obviously there's lots of rumours been going around about how much power the owner wields at Chelsea in terms of influencing the team and the squad and so on. Obviously had all the stuff before about the medical staff and the stipulations that were put on the head coach there, even in writing, in terms of actually what happens. I'm sure Xabi Alonso's clarified that a lot more as to what's going to happen in terms of the structure of the club and the first team. That's really the nub of the matter with Chelsea. It's getting those things right, getting the recruitment right as well. We obviously talked a lot about the imbalance in terms of just going for the younger players. They've already talked themselves about redressing that by bringing in some more experienced players, especially a centre half. So he'll play a huge part in that. But at the same time, he's also worked in similar systems to this. At Bayer Leverkusen and at Real Madrid, there were sporting directors. He didn't have the full managerial control, which very few people are going to get nowadays anyway. So he's walking into a situation which he's aware of. I think at Chelsea, there just seems to be so many chiefs. That's the problem. But I think they will try and streamline that a little.
To that point, I think Chelsea have got it on themselves to explain that a bit more. 'Cause they haven't got 5 sporting directors. They've got 5 people that do different jobs.
Yeah.
So just explain that a bit better so people like us can't keep
lines
saying.
of command, isn't it?
You've got 5 sporting directors, but they have different lines of responsibility. Recruitment, technical director. They have different roles. So say that and explain it so that we're not saying 5 sporting directors sounds ridiculous.
He's got a big job, hasn't he, in uniting the fan base as well, because the fans don't like what they've seen in terms of the structure of the club. They feel so detached from the way their club is being run that somebody like Xabi Alonso coming in and, as Jason says, recruiting senior players to plug the gaps where they've had way too much youth and promise with a view to future value, they could really unite the club.
I think you talk to Chelsea fans, what they say one of the biggest problems they've got is they've got nobody to really rally around at the club, not on the pitch and certainly not in the dugout. There's nobody like in the past. They've obviously had big characters on the pitch and also big characters in the dugout, and that's not really happened before, whereas Alonso fits that bill.
We're talking about Alonso fitting the bill, and we're expecting the announcement. Well, it has just been announced. The big breaking news is that Chelsea have appointed Xabi Alonso as manager of the men's team. We were talking about that difference between a manager and a head coach. He will begin his role on July the 1st, and he's agreed a 4-year contract at Stamford Bridge. So that is now official from Chelsea. A day after they lost that FA Cup final to Manchester City, Xabi Alonso has been announced as the new manager of Chelsea on a 4-year deal, and then he'll start that job on July the 1st.
We start with big news coming out of Chelsea this evening, just hours after suffering defeat to the hands of Manchester City in the FA Cup final. Well, Chelsea have moved a step closer to appointing Xabi Alonso as their new manager, with a deal now agreed. Our chief correspondent, Kaveh Solokor, has joined us here in the studio. Quite simply, Kaveh, why Xabi Alonso?
Well, he's the number one target that Chelsea have decided is the right man to take over full time. Now, interesting backstory to this, because we were actually told a week ago that Chelsea had agreed a deal for Xabi Alonso to become their new manager. We obviously put some calls into the club, and we were told, hey, hold on a second, it's not that advanced. There's still a process going on. There's still other targets we're looking at. So either Chelsea were being a little bit economical with the truth and they didn't want the news coming out before the FA Cup final today, or actually it wasn't as advanced as we'd been led to believe last week and they were still trying to tie up a deal. Now we know. The FA Cup is out of the way. Xabi Alonso is going to be the next Chelsea manager. If you look at all the CVs of the candidates, you could make a pretty good argument that he has the best CV. If I was a Chelsea fan, the only thing I'd be a little bit worried about is the fact that he doesn't have experience of managing in the Premier League. But of course, if you look at his CV, winning the double at Bayer Leverkusen, invincible season, and also everything that he achieved as a player, I think that is why Chelsea have decided to go for him rather than some of the other candidates, because there are a lot of good managers available this summer.
And that former Leverkusen obviously attracted Real Madrid, where he didn't last, obviously. But in any case, that big name reputation must count for something. But when it comes to Chelsea, not that many managers have ultimate sort of control. Will he have it?
Well, he's not going to have total control. If you are the manager of Chelsea or the head coach, let's wait and see what he's going to be called. You have to fit into the structure that they have in place. But I think he will have a little bit more of a say than, for instance, somebody like Liam Rosenior or maybe even Enzo Maresca. Don't forget, Enzo Maresca was doing a pretty good job in his first full season. Chelsea won 2 titles. They won the Club World Cup. But then I think the relationship began to deteriorate behind the scenes. There was contact from Manchester City about potentially taking over from Pep Guardiola when and if he decides to leave City. So it derailed their relationship. But I think Enzo Maresca was unhappy behind the scenes. He wanted more control, the kind of control that traditionally managers have had. But you're not going to get that. So you make a very good point in your question. Is there going to be some tension going forward? Is Xabi Alonso the kind of character who grew up playing under traditional managers, who wants the kind of control that traditional managers have? And will there potentially be some trouble further on down the road? I don't want to sort of predict that there are going to be problems in the future. I'm sure that setting out on this journey together, they will have worked out exactly what the parameters are going to be and who's going to be in charge of what. But I think he will definitely have a little bit more of a say, for instance, when it comes to transfers. But by and large, I think he will be the person who will be in charge.
OK, well, let's just talk a little bit about that in terms of transfers. We know that Chelsea have had a certain strategy in terms of how they've signed players thus far, especially given the age of the squad. Do you think that will change, given that now we have Xabi Alonso earmarked as the next man in charge?
I think it was going to change anyway. I think Chelsea have realised that they need a little bit of a tweak to their strategy when it comes to how they do business in transfer markets. I think they recognise they needed a bit more experience. They want to sign 2 or 3 ready-made players this window. They recognise they need a little bit more experience in their squad. I think they've had that with Levi Colwill coming back in. They need more players with leadership qualities, more personality, character, who can sort things out when things are going wrong on the pitch. Also who can lead when it comes to game management. So I think that is the kind of player they'll be looking for this summer. And certainly Xabi Alonso will have a say in who they sign. He'll have a very, very big say. But they're not just going to say, Xabi, you're in charge now. You're in charge of buying and selling players. You can do what you want. No, he has to fit into the structure that is already there at the club.
What do you think his main priorities are going to be, Garvey?
I mean, look, he needs to sort Chelsea out, because make no mistake, Chelsea have had a terrible season by Chelsea standards. There's a very good chance they're going to finish in the bottom half of the table. This season was all about trying to improve on what they achieved last season, going a step further, definitely getting back into the Champions League, also perhaps potentially challenging for the title. So they've taken a big step backwards. So he needs to sort that out. I think, funny enough, not being in Europe, potentially, not winning the FA Cup today means that route to the Europa League is closed. We know they're not going to be in the Champions League, probably not the Europa League, maybe Conference League if they finish 8th. Maybe he can do without the headache of Europe at all. similar to what Michael Carrick is doing at Manchester United, so he can just focus on the domestic form. I think Chelsea have some very, very good world-class players. They prove that, but consistently over a league campaign, they haven't been able to get it right. And a lot of people will say that is because the players, the squad is lacking experience, lacking leadership. That is something that they'll get with Xabi Alonso, and hopefully something that they will address during this summer's transfer window. For what it's worth, I still think it's a little bit of a risk going for Xabi Alonso. You know, it's easy to stand here and say, what a great appointment, incredible CV, incredible player, what a coup for Chelsea. But let's not forget, every managerial appointment has an element of risk to it. And I think the element of risk with Xabi Alonso is, one, his lack of Premier League experience, and two, the fact that he's also very, very closely associated with Liverpool. Although he did play for Real Madrid and Bayern Munich as well.
I'll come to Liverpool in a sec. I mean, I think it's a really good point that you mentioned about the sort of impact of lack of European football and what Carrick is doing as Manchester United. You know, maybe he's had a helping hand with not having any distractions in European competition. It's actually happened with Chelsea before. I remember they finished, I think, 10th one season. Next season, in comes Antonio Conte, and they win the Premier League title. So they have previous experience of this. Maybe 8th place and Conference League is a distraction they don't particularly want. We'll see. On Liverpool then, because obviously, as you mentioned, you know, one of the most loved players of that era at Liverpool early this century. So how much were they in the picture? Did they have a stronger hand to play maybe previously than they do right now?
Well, I don't think they've been in the picture at all. They've decided they're going to stick with Arne Slot. He said it himself at his news conference on Thursday. He has every reason to believe that he's still going to be the Liverpool manager next season. I think, look, if you have read or listened to what Xabi Alonso had said in the past, I think one day in the future he would like to be the Liverpool manager. If he was panning out his sort of ideal career path, it would involve managing Liverpool one day, but the Liverpool job is not available at the moment, and Liverpool have not made a move for him. They've known for a while that he's available. Potentially, if they had decided that they wanted to change direction, they could have contacted him, made an official approach, but that has not happened. I know a lot of Liverpool fans would love him back, but he can't pick up the phone and beg Liverpool to come in for him. He can only accept the jobs that are offered to him, and he knows that Chelsea really, really want him, and that's why he's agreed to become the new Chelsea manager.
How do you think Chelsea fans are looking at this Saturday evening? Do you think they're excited? Do you think that they're a little bit on the fence? What do you think is the general vibe?
I think overall they'll be very, very happy because I think sometimes they would have felt that perhaps, you know, we're being sort of given the prospect of getting Xabi Alonso, and it's never going to happen. We're going to have to settle for, you know, the third, fourth choice. They're obviously very unhappy, a lot of Chelsea fans, with the way the club's being run, with the ownership structure at the club. So I think if this works out, it will be great news for the Chelsea owners as well, because it will quieten down, you know, the sort of feelings amongst the fan base about what's been going wrong at the club. Having said that, the issues that the fan base have are not going to go away. Just because you get a new manager in and you maybe win a few games or win a few trophies, it's not certain that those concerns are going to go away, because I think those concerns are deep rooted. Interesting as well, the timing. You know, we're standing here on a very, very busy day when, you know, Celtic have won the Scottish title, Manchester City have won the FA Cup. There's a
Carrick
lot
as well, that news.
Michael Carrick. There's a lot going on. Yet our top story is a good news story about Chelsea. So I think
is it a slight raised eyebrow?
Well, I think from a PR and a communications point of view, instead of me and you standing here talking about what's gone wrong at Chelsea, they lost the FA Cup final. You know, what about the referee? What about VAR? They're in the bottom half of the table. They've only won one league game in 2.5 months. The Chelsea fans are protesting against the owners. Instead of talking about all that, although we have touched on it, because you're an ultimate professional and you asked the right question, we are standing here in front of a big, you know, graphic that's Xabi Alonso 4-year deal agreed. So from a PR and comms perspective, I think it's a good move for Chelsea. But look, I always say, on paper, everything looks great. Liverpool signing Isak looked great. Liverpool signing Wirtz looked great. There have been lots of things that look great on paper, but let's just wait and see how this pans out. But well done to Chelsea.
Yeah.
Most Chelsea fans would say this is the guy we wanted, and the owners have gone out and delivered.
Yeah. All right, Kave. Thank you very much indeed for the moment, Kave Solikol, our chief correspondent there.
Thierry Henry has sent a strong message to Mikel Arteta ahead of Arsenal's massive Premier League clash against Manchester City, and he didn't hold back. The Arsenal legend warned that talk is cheap unless it's backed up on the pitch, especially with such a defining test coming up this weekend. While the Gunners secured their place in the Champions League semi-finals after goalless draw against Sporting CP at the Emirates, Henry made it clear that the performance simply wasn't good enough. Yes, Arsenal got the job done, thanks to their 1-0 win in Lisbon, but managing just one shot on target at home raised serious concerns. And against a team like Manchester City, Henry believes that level just won't cut it. Now, all eyes turn to the Etihad Stadium, where Arsenal face the league leaders in what could be a title-defining showdown. Arteta's side currently holds a 6-point advantage, but City still have a game in hand, and recently beat Arsenal 2-0 in the Carabao Cup final. The stakes couldn't be higher. "I want to see that fire at the Etihad," Henry said on CBS Sports. "It's easy to talk, but go there, against Manchester City, and show what you're made of." Henry made it clear that while he believes in Arteta and the direction of the team, belief alone isn't enough. "I believe in what I see, I believe in him, in that fire. But when you say things like that, you have to deliver. And I didn't see it tonight." Despite his criticism, Henry acknowledged the significance of reaching the Champions League semi-finals, something that doesn't come around often. "We're through, and I'm very happy. A semi-final, it's huge. I never won it, but I did win the league. Now go to Manchester City and win. That's what I want to see. I believe in Mikel, yes, but show it." When asked how Arsenal should approach the game, Henry was blunt. "Not like tonight. Not like against Bournemouth, or Brighton away, or what I've seen at times this season." And when questioned whether the performance against Sporting would be enough to beat City, Henry laughed. "The Manchester City I've seen recently? They've won 4 in a row, and even Liverpool were in the mix. It could have been more." Still, Henry remains hopeful. In fact, he's been consistent in his belief since the start of the season. "I truly believe we can win the league this year. This is our biggest opportunity to prove, as a team, that we are capable." But for him, it all comes down to action, not words. "I'm sitting here in the studio, there's nothing I can do. But I've heard fire. Now I want to see that fire at the Etihad." One moment that stood out to Henry was Declan Rice's reaction at full time. Look at his face. Go back and watch it. A lot of players were smiling, but his expression. I don't know. Maybe I need to talk to him to understand what he was thinking. This is a guy who just reached a Champions League semi-final. Henry made it clear, there's no negativity in celebrating the achievement, but expectations must remain high. This is huge, congratulations. It doesn't happen often in our history, so of course I'm happy. But against City, I want the team to win, not settle for a draw. That's it. Arsenal head into the clash with just one win in their last 5 matches across all competitions, including a 2-1 defeat to Bournemouth in their most recent Premier League outing, a reminder that improvement is urgently needed if they want to make a true statement against City. The pressure, therefore, is not just about one match, it's about momentum, identity, and belief at the most critical stage of the season. Inside the Arsenal camp, there is a clear understanding that performances must match ambition. Arteta, speaking after the draw with Sporting, admitted that his team has to improve a lot, particularly in the final third, where their lack of creativity and cutting edge was evident. While defensive discipline has been a strength, the inability to control games and create consistent chances is beginning to raise questions at exactly the wrong time. That concern is echoed by pundits and former players across England, many of whom agree with Henry's assessment. The general feeling is that Arsenal have shown resilience, but not the dominance expected of a team aiming to win both the Premier League and compete deep into the Champions League. Declan Rice, however, has taken a different stance. The midfielder has brushed off external criticism, insisting that the squad remains fully focused and unaffected by outside noise. Internally, there is still strong belief that this group has what it takes to deliver in decisive moments. Rice's mentality reflects a dressing room that is trying to stay grounded, even as scrutiny intensifies. The upcoming clash with Manchester City is now being framed as more than just a top-of-the-table encounter. It's a defining test of Arsenal's maturity. City, with their experience and relentless consistency, represent the benchmark. Pep Guardiola's side are known for stepping up in exactly these moments, and their recent run of form only reinforces the scale of the challenge. For Arsenal, the narrative is clear. Promise is no longer enough. After coming close in previous seasons, this is the point where they must prove they can handle pressure, respond to criticism, and deliver when it matters most. Supporters are divided. Some see this as the perfect opportunity to make a statement and silence doubters. Others share Henry's caution, worried that recent performances hint at vulnerabilities that City are more than capable of exploiting. What happens at the Etihad could shape the remainder of Arsenal's season. A strong performance, not just in result, but in attitude and intensity, would reinforce their title credentials and validate Arteta's project. A weak display, on the other hand, would only amplify doubts and hand momentum back to their closest rivals. In many ways, Henry's words have already done their job. They've sharpened the focus, raised the stakes, and set a clear expectation. Now, all that remains is for Arsenal to respond, not with words, but with a performance that proves they truly belong at the top.